Thank you so much, Kathy, for being on the very first podcast of the Stars Among Us series based on the call. As I'm introducing you to the folks, this is Kathy. We first met years ago in about 2012 when I was part of a reading series with my script. And hey, Kathy, how are you? You had mentioned then that you were a researcher. What kind of researcher are you, and for how long have you been doing this?
So I've been doing research for over 30 years.
Wow.
I was one of these kind of unusual people who, during the HIV epidemic, got involved, who was a non-researcher.
Mm-hmm.
I was a musician out of work.
Oh.
Very common occurrence. And someone said to me, hey, someone needs some help at the St. Vincent's Hospital, which is no longer in existence, for research. And so I met with the doctor, who was amazing. And she was so funny. He showed me this drawer of paper, and said to me, this is my research, this is what we do, and you think this is something you can help with? And I'm like, oh, okay, it's just paper right now. It seems so scary. And I just rolled up my sleeves and jumped in, because at that time, what was going on in HIV was very, very scary. People were dying. I know that the fear that people are feeling now is something I'm very familiar with, because it's something that was very palpable back when I was working with HIV. People were very frightened, anxious, uncertain, and a lot of people were dying then. I'm happy to know that we don't have quite the death toll that we're seeing with coronavirus, but there still is this, for the healthcare workers, there still is this experience of having this group of deaths that happen. And when you go through this as a healthcare worker, you experience a trauma that's very hard to manage, because you still need to show a very brave face. You need to be supportive. You need to offer this feeling of there's hope. No matter what we're seeing medically, or what we're seeing even as a researcher, you still need to offer that individual that's in front of you this sense of there's the possibility. And this was so much so with the research that I was doing in HIV in the early years, was there were no answers. So people ran out of options. We went to research because there were options. So potentially there was the hope to live. Thank goodness, with the coronavirus, what we're seeing is that most people can get through the virus, but for some degree, serious component which we don't understand about coronavirus, there are some people who don't do as well, and then eventually there's a group of patients who die. And this is always a problem dealing with infectious diseases, such as this virus, that it has a sense of, first of all, it's the first time we've really seen this rampant exposure for this virus in humans. There's been indications of it all along that this virus is happening. We've had outbreaks of a type of this virus. I think in 2015 and 2012, there were some types of this type of virus that were showing up. And many people in the medical field of research and epidemiology, and people who track viruses such as this that jump from animals to humans, they have been really kind of, safe where there's the potential for a pandemic, because they can see that as we are living closer to each other and more of deforestation is happening, that there is this greater risk of these viruses that exist in humans and animals to jump into humans. And we're not really prepared, because there's a lot of issues around vaccines, and there's a lot of issues about how to study these viruses. There's a lot of issues about how do we. I think one of the problems when I first started working with CT was the virus itself is fascinating. As a scientific person, when you look at the types of viruses, they're kind of, because they don't live outside of host.
They don't. Could you repeat that again? They don't what?
So viruses don't live outside of the host.
Got it.
They need to be in the host.
Mm-hmm.
They need to rely on their further population inside of a living thing.
Mm-hmm.
They don't live outside and propagate. They just hang out.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's so weird about viruses. They're just pieces of information, cellular information that hangs out. It doesn't, like if a particle of a virus sits on something, it doesn't multiply.
Mm-hmm.
It just sits there.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do anything. It needs either an animal or a human to propagate. It needs the cell that binds with to make more of it.
So let me ask you, this has been happening, there have been evidence of it back in 2012, 2015. How is it there is nothing set up as a just in case it happens?
Well, I think that, in any kind of system, we haven't dealt with the fact that we're a global, and that many people, when scientists kind of ring an alarming bell, they don't necessarily believe that it's possible. They don't believe that this type of an infection can happen. And I think that's always the problem with viruses, is they're very invisible. They are something that, if you can figure out how they are infecting people, you can potentially prevent it. I think that's why we work so hard every year with the flu vaccine. While we can't prevent the flu, we can try and encourage people to get vaccinated so that their body will create antibodies, will give your immune system something, so that if you're exposed to the flu, you have a fighting warrior system in your body.
Now, in as much as you use that word warrior, I look at you researchers, the nurses, the doctors, the EMT, those are the new warriors of today, for this war that we have on, let's put it that way, right? So you guys are new soldiers. You had mentioned that you were about to go back into the system, let's put it that way, go back out there. There was a palpable fear, even though you're equipped, you have done the research. Could you explain that fear?
Sure. In the hospital, we have ways of doing things that provide us with security. We know that in this little wall, we have all of the materials that we need. The systems are set up so that as a healthcare worker, you have what you need to do the best you can for your patient. But when you suddenly go through that supply closet, where there is supposed to be lots and lots of protective equipment for for you, and you suddenly see that 2/3 of it is gone. It's a human response to suddenly get worse, that we're running out, and to ring an alarm bell because it's so unusual. It's so impossibly hard to perceive as a healthcare worker if you don't have access, especially in our country, where you don't have access to protective equipment easily. You know, in our country, we're used to this status quo in your hospital system of having everything you need. And when I think about the early years dealing with HIV and how fearful people felt as a healthcare worker of not knowing whether I might expose myself even if I were protected, because no one understood how this was transferred. So in the early years, when people didn't understand, even if you had protective equipment on, what do you do? And so, you know, healthcare workers are there because they are so committed to helping people understand how to navigate what's happening to them with their health. You know, it's about being a support and an educator at the same time. And if you, as a healthcare worker, are dealing with something you barely understand, or you feel you don't have the proper tools, you feel powerless. And to do that and have to go into a room with a patient, you want to feel powerful and confident. And you don't want to feel that there's anything other than reassurance that you're bringing in for that patient. Because we are at our most vulnerable when we're a patient who doesn't understand what symptoms is, and so they become fearful. And so we immediately want to help the person.
So how are you managing it now that you are facing that re-entry?
Well, no, I think when you're a researcher, you understand more about what you're up against than perhaps your regular person. And then you also understand that this isn't a time to give in to my worries. It's more of a time to give in to taking action and making you feel more useful. Take action. Support people who are not as educated as I am about what's possible. And so if I can be a source of that, of other healthcare workers, of other patients, of people who haven't had these exposures, these kinds of circumstances. I mean, when I think back about my years in HIV, there was a time that I would call a long list of people and they were all dead. And so, you know, I understand how fear shows up. And I've worked with myself to deal with managing how I'm feeling. When I have a certain background that takes awareness, I can't even possibly tell someone who doesn't understand what's going on in their body. And if I can offer reassurance to healthcare workers or to the person who's getting a test, you know, that is the most important thing, you know, is to continue to offer a deeper sense of it.
I love hearing that, and I can hear it in the way that you are speaking, in a way that is sort of an educational format, which is great. That allows for the listening and the taking in of the information that you're giving, and I appreciate you for that. So now what I'm going to do is, because we're going on time here, as a professed introvert, which we learned on the call, how is that affecting the comedic path that you have taken on?
Well, as someone who straddles this kind of, I'm a performer and I am a scientist in some ways. My performer person is very sad, so I do a lot of journaling. This has brought up a lot of time. Journal, write. I find the comedy in this because when I grew up, self-care was just about taking a shower. It wasn't about meditating or going out and getting a haircut. It was just making sure that you showered, put some deodorant on, and brushed your teeth. So self-care was never something that was further than just that you have a bar of soap. And now when I try to think of things that are about self-care, as far as my mental state or how it's not easy, because my other friend who's an introvert reached out to me and said, I sure do miss our brunch. And I'm like, yeah, me too, because, we're both people who kind of just are very introverted, but we come together for a brunch to kind of just share the air. And yet, it's not easy. You need that. There's an energy that we feel when we're in the presence of someone.
And that is why I'm really hoping that more people take advantage of our Sunday get together on the call to offer that connection in whatever way, but make it also an arousing scenario where people can offer their talents. So my last question to you now is this. What do you consider your biggest success? What are you most proud of in your career or careers? Because you've had a couple: musician, scientist, researcher, which is great.
To be honest, I think it's hard for me to connect to being proud. This is a difficult thing. I find it very challenging to feel a sense of pride. But I think when I think about it, is there's a paper that me and another doctor wrote about the issue of trust and how you, for a person who has problems, or is a marginalized part of society, drugs, maybe have psychological issues, how do you find trust in other people or into your healthcare provider? What does that look like? And one of the things I think I'm the most proud of is that when I'm working with patients, that I can have this very honest, connected, present conversation that brings up real issues. I treasure that ability, that I love to hear people's stories and how they struggle to figure out life when life has been so challenging. And when I've been told these stories, I feel compelled to make their voices heard in the research I do.
Oh my God.
I feel compelled to figure out the processes that will reach them, to help them right where they are. And I think that's hard because some of the reasons that a person might be marginalized are so complex that to truly look at this person and say, well, it's more than this and they do that, or they say one thing, but the truth is more than one thing. It always is. And if you can offer that person your compassion, your love, and support in moments that you might give them an opportunity to find hope.
That in itself is your gift. That in itself is your gift. And I wish we had more time to converse, but I know we'll come back to it because I'd like to keep in touch with you based on you actually being and spending time within the war. What you've just said in terms of what gives you the most pride was truly impactful. I could hear the emotion in your voice. I could hear how real those other people's situations are to you. And I thank you for the research that you do to help aid those situations that you hear about. And I am so blessed to know you, to know these other parts of you. Thank you for being the first, for trusting me in this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Kathy?
Hey there.
Stay
Please
blessed
help us
too.
in our
Love
mission
you.
to support those facing
Bye.
fatal diseases through our t-shirt sales by donating or shopping at AussieStewart.com or supporting us at anchor.fm/AussieStewart. That's ANCHOR.FM/AussieStewart. And don't forget to subscribe on our YouTube channel at Aussie Stewart. Yep. Leave a comment.